Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to have the chance to present the Swiss approach to disaster risk reduction. We call it integrated risk management. Today at this course on water governance and water security in Central America. My name is Caroline Scherf. I'm working for the Hazard Prevention Division at the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment, which is the federal authority to deal with disaster risk reduction. I'm working there since 10 years, since more than 10 years, and I'm responsible for the topics of disaster risk reduction and climate change. And also I'm responsible for the international cooperation projects. So my technical background is geology. In the next 30 minutes, I will give you an overview about the Swiss situation, which is in many areas maybe quite different to your national context. But I think also many aspects will be the same in Switzerland as they are in your countries. So I'm convinced that we can learn from each other. My presentation will deal more on a strategic and more concept level, but my colleague Katharina Edmaier, she will follow or complement this presentation then with more practical examples from flood protection. I'm very sorry that this is a pre-recorded session, so we will not have like direct interaction. But I will leave you my email at the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions. Or if you have any interest in documentation or more background information, I'm happy to get in touch with you. So let's start. What is Switzerland like? I was checking a bit which Central American country is a bit similar to Switzerland in terms of area or inhabitants, and I found Dominican Republic, which is a little bit bigger than Switzerland and has similar number of inhabitants. The geomorphology might be quite different, since in Switzerland we have quite high mountains. The three main regions in Switzerland are called the Jura, the Central Plateau, and the Alps. In the Jura, it's a mountainous area with mountains up to 2,000 meters, and the main natural hazards there are landslides and debris flows. In the Alps, which is the biggest part of Switzerland, we have mountains up to almost 5,000 meters. We have the main problems in natural hazards are avalanche, rockfall, debris flow, and landslides. In the Central Plateau, which is about 30% of the area, we have the main problems about floods, storms, and landslides. In this Central Plateau, most of the bigger cities and the values, the assets, and the people are located. If you see on this map of Switzerland, you see all these little dots. Each dot stands for a loss event during the last 30 years. And you see whole of the country is actually affected by natural hazards. Overall, we can say that 4 out of 5 communities have been affected in the last 30 years by floods or debris flows. And 2 out of 5 communities have been affected by landslides. So the topic is really, it's not on daily business, but it's really, it's a business for everybody. If we have a look, which is the most costliest natural hazards, it's by far it's floods, and we can look even a bit closer if you want to differentiate what kind of floods. It's the flash floods, which are increasing due to climate change. They make up to 30 to 50% of the damage is due to flash floods. On average, in Switzerland, we have 6 people dying from natural disaster every year, and about 300 million damage each year. Another figure to what is potentially affected from floods. And here it's differentiated between the resident population, about the employees which are potentially affected, the building zones and the railway lines. And in principle or in overall, we can say that more than 25% of all people, buildings, infrastructure are potentially affected by floods. We think that this is a good or enough reason, because it's a lot of value at risk, to have a good strategy in place to deal with this risk. And as I was saying in the beginning, we call it the integrated risk management. This is our strategy. This strategy has not been come up overnight. It has a long process, and what triggered this and how we came to where we are now or where we are today is I would like to tell you in the next minutes and slides. In principle, it was often the lessons learned from catastrophic events which triggered a mind shift, which triggered to change something in the way how you deal with disasters. Excuse me. Yeah, a few examples of big events. On these slides, we see that in the beginning of the 1830s to the 1870s, there have been quite a few big damage events happening. These triggered large watercourse corrections, and these were followed by a relatively long time span where almost no big disasters happened. We call it the disaster gap. This combination of the water corrections and the long disaster gap triggered that in the end, the respect for natural hazard decreased in the population, but also in the decision maker. There was the belief or the thinking that everything is under control, everything is stable, nothing can happen. This belief also had consequences for the flood protection, because during that time span, many assets have been built into hazard zones. Before, people didn't build in special zones because they knew there will be events, there will be floods, they would not have built there. But after the correction, they were quite confident that they are safe. Another consequence was that the flood protection measures, namely the channeling of rivers, they decreased the capacity of rivers for large flood peaks. And in the end, too little retention areas have been kept free or created to be then available during extreme events. What has been also neglected was to maintain water bodies and also the protection structure. In 1987, a big flood event occurred, and it was kind of a shock event. It was a wake-up call, however you want to name it, for this belief. We did everything, we had everything under control, everything is built, structural flood protection was there. So this belief was totally overthrown, and the lesson learned in the end was there is no absolute safety. So we have to rethink our strategy. What also came out from these lessons learned, or from this analysis, what we always do after big events, lessons learned was that there is no total protection. So you have to have protection according to value, because you cannot protect everything. And what has been recognized the first time, more or less, that hazard fundamentals are very important, that land use planning is the measure to prevent, to build up new risks, and that the maintenance of river courses is very important. This 87 floods triggered then also, it was kind of a window of opportunity to change strategies. It triggered in the end, a couple of years later, in 91, the revision of the Water Protection Act. That was very important because this is the national framework which decides where you go in the protection. So the Water Protection Act requested the first time that hazard fundamentals have to be developed for all settlement areas. The Water Protection Act also requested that there is a differentiation of protection targets, and it requested that you have to maintain rivers and the protection measures. Quite some time later, in 2004, the first national natural hazard strategy has been developed. And here you see already in the wording that there has been a mind shift from hazard to risk. So in these more than 10 years, the strategy was developed further, that it's not all about hazard, it's about risk. I will get to this later. In 2005, there was another big event, which again had a event analysis, and lessons learned from this event were that on top of what has been learned in 87, and many things have been improved by then, that the coordination, and especially the coordination among the preparedness and intervention bodies, is key. Because during this event, it did not work out so well that the forecast, the early warning and the alert and the information of the population, but also for the local fire brigades and so on, did not work super well. So this was like the key finding of this event and has been improved since then quite a lot. And I think Katharina will talk about this also later. So what is the integrated risk management? What is it all about? In principle, it starts always with a question, what can happen? So whatever situation you have, you have to make sure that you know what is your hazard exposure, what is your vulnerability, and what is the risk. If you answer this question, you can go to the next step and discuss with all relevant stakeholders, with different sectors, with different administrative levels. You have to agree on what do we allow to happen. So which risk do we accept in the end? So it means what do we want to protect and what not. This is not an easy discussion, but it's a discussion which you have to have. This might be time consuming, but it's very crucial for a success of a project, because if you have this discussion, you agree on it, you will make sure that the project you are in the end implementing will be more sustainable, because all the relevant stakeholders are on the same line. They agree, they are happy with whatever you do later. So if you found your decision, okay, this and this we have to protect, you have to go one step further and make sure to find the right methods. So what can we do about it? How can we either avoid the risk, reduce the risk, and the rest, the residual risk, how can we transfer the risk? The integrated risk management is not about that you do it once and then it's done, then it's over. No, it's a continuous assessment and monitoring. So you will always go back and ask yourself, do we still record the right thing? Is it still the same exposure? Is it still the same vulnerability? Or do we have to change something? Do we still agree on what we have decided once, that this is like the protection level we want to have? And do we still do the right measures? Or do we have to combine differently? And the integrated risk management is also a universal approach for all kinds of hazards. Here, I would not go into detail, but just to show it to you once. We call this is the cycle of measures in integrated risk management. At the very center is the risk assessment. So as I said before, it's always, you have to know exactly what is your risk all about. And then you can decide on which measures you want to take. Integrated means, in our understanding, that we think not about one hazard only, we think about all prevailing natural hazards. We think about to combine, or which type of measures can we combine, which makes sense in this case. And also you always consider all future developments in terms of maybe climate change, what will it change? Or what is your future land use planning or settlements, what will they be like in 30, 40 years? And you always also consider the various aspects of sustainability in terms of cost benefit, but also what is good for ecology, what do you need for protection, how you can find a good balance. And as I said before, it's always important to involve all actors and involve people. If we look a bit closer to the prevention preparedness area of this cycle, I want to show you this slide, because this again should demonstrate underlying. You have the hazard map. You can see this map underlying. And then it's always about a combination of the various measures. And you can never say, it's always good to do only land use planning or do only this. It's always, you have to go to your specific site, to your specific problem, and find the best combination for this problem. So it's normally always a combination from land use planning, organizational measures, biological protection measures, or technical protection measures. And it's always different for every project. So there is no just one way to go. In this slide, I wanted to emphasize again how we see it. It's the process I want to emphasize again. So at a certain point, someone might decide, or a group might decide, we have a current risk, which is too high, it's not acceptable, we have to reduce it. We have to reduce this risk. To reduce the risk, you always go to your cycle of measures, let's say. You find out which is the best combination, and by combining, by doing several measures, you will come to a point where your safety level is maybe lower or is close to what you wanted to achieve. It will never be zero. This is what we were hearing before. And this is an acceptable level of safety or acceptable level of risk. What is very important, that it doesn't stop here, but you have to make sure that the long-term planning need to be so that the risk will not increase in the coming years again. So what do you do? The most important measure for this is the spatial planning measures. They have to be in place, that you make sure that not assets are built again in hazard areas. So this is like the crucial measure for avoiding to build up new risks. What are today's major challenges for us here in Switzerland? In Switzerland, one major issue is the urbanization. You remember the geomorphology of Switzerland. We have only this narrow central plateau. So it's densely populated in this area. And if you see here the development of Zurich city, this is the biggest city of Switzerland. It's totally built on an alluvial fan, and you see how it's totally overbuilt in this alluvial fan. I guess this is not only a problem of Switzerland. I guess many of your cities might be in a hazardous area, and it's already overbuilt. So it's often not that you can start from the green grass, let's say, but yeah, So we have this problem in Zurich is quite big. We have 5.5 billion Swiss franc, which are potentially at risk in Zurich. Yeah, I was saying it's on an alluvial fan. You see here comes the river, and large parts of the city are located on this fan. Again, another picture to see the space for rivers is very limited. Many rivers in Switzerland are still in a shape like this. And this is a major challenge for us in the future. Another challenge, which you might also encounter, is the impact of climate change. In Switzerland, we expect a warming until the end of the century of 3 to 5 degrees. And this has major impacts also on the natural hazard situation. So of course, higher temperature have higher water concentration in the atmosphere or trigger higher water concentration in the atmosphere, which in the end leads then to often more storms, thunderstorms, and triggering floods and flash floods. This will increase in future. We observe it already, but it will increase even more. What also changes is the seasonal pattern. So we have more rainfall in autumn and winter, and we have much less in summer. In summer, this causes then more droughts and forest fires, and the increase of the temperature also triggers the melting of the permafrost and also the retreat of the glaciers. And this in the end then leads to a destabilization of many of the mountain areas. Here I have just a few slides to see what it's like. Here you see a mountain hut being next to the glacier. The melting of the permafrost and the glacier retreat then can trigger such things. So the hut has been removed. Or here you see up here there is a mountain hut, and this, when it was built, it was only a few meters away from the glacier beneath. And now every year the staircase has to be extended that the people from this hut can go down there. Just to see that it's really quite dramatic how the glacier retreat is obvious in the area. So I will not repeat this again, but what we can say, the challenges are what I was just saying, and this triggers the increase of the risk. And as I was saying, it's not only in Switzerland that we have like a situation where it's not getting easier. So we know also the international community. Here I took one example, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk. They also have a strategic framework. And if we compare this Sendai Framework with the integrated risk management, it covers quite the same, or it's very similar. And it's not only Switzerland having a strategy in place, it's many countries which developed over the last 10 to 20 years their strategies. And in our point of view, these strategies often do, the ones we know about, but they also should include some of the following points. I would like to go through it and then also highlight a few points to it in the next couple of minutes. So for us, it's very important that you have an enabling environment. So you have to have a framework where you do disaster risk reduction, and this needs a good political support in terms of you have good and continuing law. You have to have a financial support, and this not just for 1 year and not just for one election period. It has to be continuous. then it's always important in our understanding that roles and responsibilities are quite clear, that they are agreed and respected in the end. And a very important point for us is the cooperation, a trustful cooperation, a supported cooperation, and it should be the cooperation between all sectors, authorities, and stakeholders. It's also part of this participation. And it's very important that the people are aware. It's not only the people, it's also the decision makers, that there is a awareness in place and capacities around to really then handle the disaster risk reduction. I was saying it before, but I want to emphasize it again. For us, it's key and crucial that all disaster risk reduction activities, measures whatsoever, are based on updated hazard and risk information. So this is it's a fundament. You have to have them in place. Then for us, it's very important that you consider all risk management options, the prevention, the mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And I mentioned it before, it's a permanent task. It never ends. You always go back after the event. You review what has worked, what has to be improved, and you start from the beginning. And you never do it alone. You do it jointly with all stakeholders. This is already like a summary, but since a few of these points are very important, I want to elaborate a bit more. If I'm talking about the enabling environment, I think it's very important to understand a bit the Swiss political system. We have like 3 authority levels. We have the federal government. This is where the Federal Office for the Environment is located. Then we have the cantons and we have municipalities. These 3 areas have different tasks. On the federal level, you are more on a strategic, on a concept level. You prepare the legislation. You supervise the implementation, so you give guidance, and the implementation has to be kind of followed by this or follow this guidance, because otherwise there won't be a financing. So it's a financing between federal government and cantons. And in principle, you give the strategic management. The cantons then have by law, the responsibility for the protection of their people. And they oversee the operational management and normally delegate down to the municipalities the implementation of the protection measures. This task sharing is not only that it's shared between the various administration levels. No, there are many more. In Switzerland, it's very important that you involve, or the Swiss insurance, or the insurance mechanism in Switzerland is very important, because we have a mandatory house or building insurance. So that means everybody who has a building has an insurance which protects you from the losses or damages of natural hazards. This is combined with a fire insurance, so it's mandatory, everybody has it. Then the homeowners, they are also a very important group for us, because they are the ones then implementing that you have hazard-proof buildings. And you have to be in good cooperation with research, science, and technology, that you have this knowledge available. And this goes a bit with the homeowners association. So it's important that the architect, the engineers, that they are aware and also knowledgeable about natural disasters, and consider this when they plan buildings. And they have to respect, of course, the building codes and the building standards. Again, it's all about cooperation. So it's about cooperation. Everybody has a share, and you work together. What do you think is which are good, or which are necessary preconditions for this good cooperation? I don't want to repeat everything, but again, it's about roles and responsibilities. And it's also about joint planning, that you know what is the other area doing, that you don't duplicate, but you use synergies. Then for us, it's very important that the local communities, that they are the ones where the emergency might happen. So risk management need to be well anchored at the local level. For us, it's very important that decision-making is a participative process. It needs to be transparent, trustful again, and this will lead to better solutions. We also think that responsibilities should be delegated as far down as possible, also down in the sense of from the federal, cantonal to municipalities, because they are the ones who know their local context, and they in the end also bear the responsibility. And if you do this, you delegate down responsibilities, it has to ensure that also there at this level, then there is suitable resources, but also the capacities need to be there. I think I'm coming slowly to an end. Coming back to awareness and capacities. So it's important that the capacities are there where they are needed. So we think that awareness building, at the one hand for decision makers, but also for the public at large, is very important. So we have to use also this window of opportunities to have the politicians on board to get their continuous support. And I think in Switzerland, we're in a quite good situation. We can really not complain that we are often high on the agenda. So our topic is well known. What we also support is that education and training at universities, they are for engineers, but also architects and so on, that this is including disaster risk reduction in their curricula. And also that research is undertaken, and also, applicable research which can then be taken from the universities down to the engineers in the field to apply the best knowledge. What we are also supporting, and we have a big program on this, we train local disaster risk reduction advisors. So these people, they are from the communities, and they are the ones bringing the local knowledge, and they are trained in disaster risk reduction, that they can combine these two knowledge areas. And we think it's also important to provide always opportunities for regular knowledge exchange. So these are my reflections on what we think will create in the end a good environment for having successful disaster risk reduction in place. I hope I could give you a good overview for a start. And I'm happy, as I was saying in the beginning, to get back to your questions. You can always contact me, and I hope it was quite or a little bit helpful for you to show how we in Switzerland do disaster risk reduction. Thank you very much.